Would you look at that? Seems our little human has finally decided to join the world of the living again. Did you find your strength again, dearie? It must have been quite an eventful night for you, after all. Tell me, does your leg still feel sore? Surely it must hurt. Or perhaps you're more concerned with your neck. A bit of bruising is always to be expected. Besides the puncture marks, of course. I recommend you get used to that feeling. Though, humans never had a reputation for a particularly high pain tolerance. Perhaps I ought to be a little bit more considerate of how fragile your kind's bodies are. And your minds on top of that. I wouldn't be surprised if you felt a bit disoriented, considering you've been unconscious for quite a while. Oh, please. There's no need to be scared. I don't bite without a reason. I wouldn't say no to another sip of your blood, of course, but it'd be no fun to overdo it when we've just started. I'd rather save some of the anticipation, the excitement. Don't you agree that there's a certain magic in having to wait? It makes the experience so much more enjoyable. Imagine a child on Christmas Eve who simply can't wait to finally open its presents. All the wrapping paper, colorful bows, the warm lights. As tempting as it may be to tear the paper off right then and there, it's much more rewarding to wait for the right time. Much the same is true for me right now. Except unlike some children, I'd hate to break my new toy so soon. After all, I consider you to be a rare gem, dearie. Not only did you find your way onto my territory, into my trap, you also taste heavenly. The delicate flavors complement each other so perfectly, like an expensive wine. I'd consider it a sin to waste even a drop of your blood, let alone your life. Trust me, you have no idea how delicious you taste to me, after I've had to feed on animals for such a long time. It must have been close to 100 years since I last had a mouthful of blood as rich and flavorful as your own. Most likely you think I'm some ruthless monster who lusts for death and destruction. Surely you must question why I don't just give up these woods altogether and go hunting somewhere I can hope to come across humans to feed on. You mortals are pragmatic like that, quick to act, quick to judge, but often you fail to see the broader picture. I certainly don't seek your approval, little human, but I expect you to behave and comply with my rules. I'd at least like to make an attempt to show you my perspective, why I live the way I do. I've been isolated here for such a long amount of time. I have little knowledge about the state of the world out there. As much as I would like to believe that peace has finally been established between vampires and humans, your reaction upon realizing what I am tells me all I need to know. I've been on both sides of the war. I know the injustice and cruelty out there, Believe me, dear, it's not just the vampires who can commit horrific acts. It's all of us. I've denied you my life story before, when it was clear you were merely trying to manipulate me. But there is a time and place for reminiscing, and I believe it'll help you understand that I am no monster. Perhaps it will ease your nerves a bit to know about your captor, make you less prone to rash decisions and disobedience. If I'm not mistaken, I've mentioned my mother to you before, haven't I? It was just me and her back then, when I was still a human. I mean, an innocent child. We lived in a small house near the edge of the village, close by a little stream. We didn't own much, but we were family, and the rich garden my mother tended to on the daily always put enough food on our plates, and I spent my days climbing trees and chasing small animals. It was the only time in my life I've ever felt truly content. Even now, as I've lived for so many years, the carnal pleasure of drinking someone's warm, velvety blood doesn't come anywhere close to the joy I felt simply smelling the flowers or tasting the first sweet fruits of the season. My mother was a wise woman. She always knew just what to do. The townsfolk respected her knowledge of the healing powers of all sorts of herbs. The ones that couldn't afford to call for a doctor often came to us with whatever ailments were plaguing them. More often than not, my mother was able to help. You'd think someone as kind and as generous as her would surely earn the favor and gratitude of their peers. But, you see, her wisdom came to be her downfall, and mine by extension. A famine came around. Men and animals alike had to go hungry for weeks on end. In dire times, people tend to turn towards superstition. The townfolk suspected witchcraft. And who else would the blame fall upon other than the one who possesses expertise in medicine? They accused my mother of cursing their fields and spoiling their crops. So, they killed her, dragged her out of our house onto the streets, and ended her life right before my eyes. And all I did was hide. Even then, as a child, I felt like a coward. I've blamed myself for her death for a long time. Told myself if I couldn't have saved her, I at least should have died that day as well. But obviously, it never came to that. For better or for worse, I haven't yet decided. With my mother gone, all that was left for me was to run. So I ran, as far as my legs could carry me. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted to put as much distance as possible between myself and the horrors I'd seen that day. I left behind her body, the house I grew up in, and along with it all the beautiful memories that had now been tainted with her blood. I don't remember how long I must have traveled for, but eventually I came across a town. It was much bigger and more lively than the environment I was used to, crowded enough to stay anonymous and keep myself fed by stealing a watch here, a bracelet there. I didn't enjoy being a thief. My mother had taught me better than that, but it was the only way to survive. Over time, I became more comfortable, settled into my new life. The dark alleys of the city, far away from the crowds and noise, became my new home. For years, I was blissfully unaware who I was sharing my home with, until it was too late. While I knew the existence of vampires, their number and preferred hunting grounds were largely unknown back then. As I understand now, they'd been roaming the streets of that particular town for quite a while. Just like myself, they enjoy the anonymity of the crowds, the ability to simply take what they needed and vanish. Once again, I believe I was destined to die the day I was turned. It was the vampire's carelessness that led him to spare my life. Had he taken any more blood, surely I would have passed away. But instead, I felt a sharp pain spreading throughout my body, starting from the bite marks on my neck. In case you're unaware, a human may only turn into a vampire if they're left with just barely enough blood to survive. When I woke up, nothing was as before. It is customary for a newly turned vampire to receive guidance from the one responsible for their doom. After all, it is no small task to keep a constant craving for blood under control, to not draw attention to yourself and your kin, to not let the monster you've become control you. However, I was never afforded the privilege of being taken in by my master. Even after I approached him, begged him to teach me, he couldn't care less about what he had done to me. I'm not proud of the times that followed. I lost control of my hunger, gave in to any little craving, took the lives of so many innocent people. Bloodlust is a curious thing, dearie. Not only does it make you lose control in the moment, it is also an excellent excuse to justify your actions, to drown out any feelings of guilt that might arise when you hold yet another lifeless body in your arms. I lived like that for a long time, taking lives and never looking back, leaving a trail of blood wherever I went. I was convinced I had a right to alter the lives of so many mortals simply because of the injustice I had to endure on my own. As I know now, I was gravely mistaken. Surely, you must wonder what could have possibly changed me. What could have possibly convinced a bloodthirsty monster to live deep inside a forest, almost as dangerous as itself? Even thinking about that night stirs up emotions vampires should be incapable of. I don't remember much of how the night began. The bloodlust drowned out any sensation but the rich, downy blood I felt in my tongue. Suddenly, the crimson red fog in my mind lifted, and I found myself locking eyes with a small boy, cowering in the bushes, my fangs still buried deeply in the flesh of the man before me. The way he was shivering, the look of pure desperation in his eyes, it brought back some of the sanity I thought I'd lost forever. And for the first time in years, I realized I was tearing apart families, killing daughters, fathers, loved ones. I'd become just as cruel as the monsters who have taken my mother from me. But I knew it was too late to save the boy's father. He would have never survived to live as a human. If I had stopped drinking his blood right there and then, surely he would have turned. But at what cost? Under no circumstance would I have been a suitable mentor, as I myself was barely clinging to the last bits of humanity that was still intact within me. So, to turn this man into another vampire without a master, roaming the streets, and possibly taking his own son's life as his first meal? I had to kill him. For the first and only time, I consciously ended someone's life. I drank every last drop of his blood, and all the while I couldn't bring myself to take my eyes off of the frightened little boy. I wasn't blinded by thirst. The bloodlust hadn't clouded my judgment. My only excuse, my only way of justifying what has happened is the thought that this was the best possible outcome. I tell myself it was the better, for the boy's sake, the greater good. And yet, I find myself thinking about him. I wonder what had become of him, what his life was like. I am certain he must have passed away by now, but I sincerely hope it was old age that took him. That day I promised myself, no, I demanded of myself to abandon my ruthless ways. And I have kept my word. I have lived deep inside this forest ever since. I feed on animals. I keep away from humanity. Until you came along, that is. You see, dearie, you've made me lose my composure, unburied some of the dark traits I thought I had left behind long ago. And now that I've had a taste, I can't just let you leave. I can feel my cravings re-emerging from deep within. This curse has long buried its roots further into my soul than I thought. Until I find a way to deal with it once and for all, you'll be my way of keeping it under control, whether you like it or not. Oh dear, you're mistaken. I never said I'd refrain from hurting a human ever again. All I promised is that I wouldn't take away a beloved family member. You, however, you decided to wander onto my territory. If I don't keep you here, surely you will die by the hands of a creature within these woods. You see, I'm not taking you away from anyone. You were the one who's done this to yourself. Oh, but there's no need to worry. You may be mine now, but I do intend on treating you with the bare minimum of dignity a sentient being deserves. Fortunately for you, that means I won't take your blood again today. I will return shortly. I do believe I hear something struggling in one of my traps. Let's hope it's not one of your friends, dearie.